So we'll get started. So hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's webinar in our ongoing series exploring careers and research topics. My name's Dr. Sam Moxon, and I'm joining you not just as the host today, but also as one of the speakers. And that's because our focus is quite personal, but really important. We're talking about what it means to study or work in academia while you're living with a chronic health condition. And balancing academic life can be demanding for anyone. But when you're also navigating a fatigue, pain, brain fog, frequent medical appointments, it adds a layer of complexity that often goes unseen and unsupported. So this session is about sharing lived experiences, offering strategies and finding solidarity. It's not just about pushing through, but about learning how to thrive while respecting your body and your boundaries. And I'm delighted to say that joining me today is Rachel Allen. Hi, Rachel.
Hello.
And Rachel's a PhD student at the University of West Scotland, and her research explores career development for people with young onset dementia, looking at how work, identity, and disability intersect. And she also brings personal experience of managing a chronic health condition alongside academic commitments. And so what we're going to do to start is share our thoughts for around 10 to 15 minutes, tell you a little bit about our stories and our experiences, and then you can put your questions to us if you would like, and we can have a chat around the topic. And I hope that you'd also engage, share your tips, share your experiences if you wish to. And whether you live with a chronic illness or if you want to better support someone you know who does, we're just glad that you're here to join us today. So let's kick this discussion off. Rachel, do you want to go first and tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for the introduction, Sam. Yeah, my name's Rachel. I started my PhD in 2021, so I'm hopefully coming near the end now. And I'm part of the Alzheimer's Scotland Centre for Policy and Practice at UWS. So I have had ME, also known as chronic fatigue syndrome, since I was 17. I'm a lot older than that now. I'm now 43, and during the PhD, I've had the extra complication of some hormone stuff and perimenopause stuff going on, which has exacerbated the ME symptoms quite substantially. So that's been quite difficult. But for those who may not be aware, ME is a condition that affects people very individually, but it causes profound fatigue, muscle soreness and pain, weakness, brain fog, difficulty concentrating, and lots of other symptoms. But the main ones for me are profound fatigue and muscle soreness.
Thanks for sharing that, Rachel. We'll have some questions that we'll both answer. On my perspective, so I finished my PhD about 8 years ago, and then I've been working in academia ever since. And during the pandemic, it was the start of 2021, I was diagnosed with a form of inflammatory bowel disease called ulcerative colitis. And I blogged very openly about this. You can find some of my blogs on the website about this. This is also was a big inspiration behind the Food for Thought podcast series that we run on the Dementia Researcher podcast, because the situation I found myself in was firstly an appreciation for how misunderstood and sort of, I guess, underestimated digestive disorders are, how disruptive they are until you have one yourself. I won't go in too graphic a detail, but simply Google ulcerative colitis and look at the symptoms and imagine sort of the worst end of that symptoms. That was the situation I was in. I ended up spending 7 days in hospital on a steroid drip. I lost a lot of weight. And then that first year was all about finding the right way to deal with it for myself. And I started to find different ways that I could influence my own health with diet, exercise. And that's what led me to the series we have around diet, exercise, and brain health. But I think the weird thing for me is I don't look unwell. And because it's a hidden disability, if you see me when this flares up, you would know I'm unwell. But 95% of the time, I look fine. And yet, it's still this thing that you have in the back of your mind, that you have this thing that could come and get you at any moment. And there's probably a lot of things that you put down to just a normal day-to-day thing. That you feel particularly tired one day, you forget that you actually do have something that is basically a constant struggle that you have to deal with. But the way I sort of look at it now is, I think part of the reason I ended up in that situation was a lot of poor life choices around diet and how I looked after myself. And actually, since I got diagnosed, weirdly, this is some of the healthiest I've felt, because I've taken it as a sign that I need to take that seriously. But that's basically my personal story. And I think what we can do is, we've got some questions that we're going to ask, and I think we can take it in turns to help you guys who are listening and watching understand a bit more. And we're going to start with the lived experience. We've touched on some of the details on our experiences. So the first question, and Rachel, you can, if you don't mind, can go first on this, is what a typical day looks like and how you manage potential fluctuations in health.
I find this question quite difficult to answer. Before I started the PhD journey, one of the jobs I did was as a benefit advisor. So anyone on the call that's got experience of filling out a PIP form will understand what I mean when you're trying to answer questions about how your condition affects you. I think you automatically kind of go to the most positive, and you try and kind of be like, oh, I can do this and I can manage this. But actually you can do that, but with a lot of difficulty and a lot of extra effort. So it's hard because, for example, if I manage like a longer walk on a particular day, the next day, I'm probably not going to manage that. Sometimes I can get away with it and then walk a little bit further the next day. So it really kind of fluctuates. But what helps me quite a lot is having a routine and trying to stick to that as much as possible, with having rest times built into that I can then extend when I need to, when my symptoms are worse. But I find it so hard to answer what a typical day is like, because it can depend, if my fatigue is worse, if the soreness is worse. So that's really difficult to answer, particularly with all the hormone stuff going around, because it can depend on what's going on with that as well. But I don't know about you, Sam, if you find that there is a typical day or not, or.
Yeah, for me, so, and anyone watching it, by the way, if you want to ask questions, please do put them into the chat and we can answer them when they come in. I think for me, days can be more typical until it flares up. So the thing with IBD is, when it's not flaring up, you feel normal, you feel fine, you take regular medication. When it does flare up, you feel about as unwell as you could feel. So for me, every day for the last couple of years has been normal. Get up, do some exercise, have some breakfast, go to work, all those kind of things. But the one thing that I do have with me that I didn't have before is, any time I go to the toilet, there's a slight concern that is it going to be okay today? And it has been for 3 years now, but there's still that fear. And so I find that I massively over-assess how good my digestive system is working. And digestive discomfort is normal for everyone. It happens all the time. But when you've got a chronic illness that, the main symptom of that is serious digestive issues, you take every small one as a concern that it might be the start of something bigger. And so I think one of the things that I've had to get used to is the fact that, one, I'm going to have bad days that aren't IBD related, and I need to know that. And I think I've started to learn the difference between the two. But two, if I do sense in any way that it might be recurring, I've got a good support team of IBD specialists who I can reach out to and do that straight away, just to make sure. So I think that's the other thing. The weird thing for me is that I've got a friend who has IBS, which is medically not as severe as IBD. But the weird thing is, his day-to-day seems a lot more complicated than mine, because it's a lot harder to manage. And sometimes I feel like, not guilty is the wrong word, but I feel like, I'm fortunate that I have something that can manage it when other people don't, but it doesn't get rid of that anxiety that you still have, what's going to happen today. And I think that can sort of lead us into another question, which is around misconceptions. And we've got a specific thing about what misconceptions people have about studying with a chronic illness, but also what misconceptions we face in general? I mean, do you find that because it's, you know, is ME classed as a hidden disability, and therefore do you sometimes get people who don't understand that because it's not as obvious that how severe it actually is?
Yeah, I mean, when I was diagnosed, it was you kind of fell into two categories. You were either kind of pretty lazy, so therefore you were tired, or you were this, you know, very kind of driven overachiever and you were burned out. You were one of those two things. So it was very much seen as a sort of psychological personality orientated condition, which now I think is better understood. Particularly, unfortunately, now people have developed long COVID, and that has a lot of similarities with the symptomology of ME. But I still carry that stigma with me because I've had the condition since that time when it was associated with these sort of negative things. So I'm constantly, I think, carrying that load of having to address that stereotype and that misconception. May not be something that I overtly or consciously do. But one of the difficulties that I have struggled with ME is there's no blood test for it. There's no scan, there's no definitive, this is what it is, this is what's caused it, this is what your prognosis is. So it's very difficult because I have the hope of getting better, but that hasn't happened. So I have to kind of plan with what I have in the moment. And I don't think you can really tell that I have ME by looking at me. I think people close to me, close friends and things, they can see when I'm kind of fading, and when I'm not so great, they can tell. But just generally, but I think that's one of the difficulties, Sam, is other people can't tell, but then neither can I. So you've got this really profound exhaustion, and I'm trying to write or read or whatever it is I'm trying to do. And I find myself sort of constantly analysing, you know, is this, you know, the ME? You know, is this just normal tiredness? Have I not done enough? Have I done too much? You're constantly trying to analyse what's going to make you well or what's going to make you worse, and trying to get done what you need to do. And I think that's a lot to be processing in your head, as well as the PhD stuff.
Yeah, I think what you said there reminds me. I've got some people very close to me who have chronic migraine, and that's another one where you look at the person, you can't tell they have chronic migraine. It's also quite hard to diagnose. There isn't really a blood test. There's, obviously, the symptoms are very physical, so it's a lot clearer. The treatment options aren't always great, and they have that same thing of when, if they feel tired or, you know, things don't feel right that day, they don't know if it's because they're fatigued or if it's because there's some predrome from the migraine. It's like, it's just a constant question of, what am I? Is this something else, or is this my illness? I think that's the difference with something that's digestive, is it's very obvious, but then there are sort of chronic fatigue issues associated with it. But I think that the misconception that I find myself is, and actually it's a weird one. So one of the things that I've been fortunate enough to be provided by the universities that I've worked at is the disabled parking pass, because on the days that it's bad, the ability to get into a building quickly and get to a bathroom is essential. Yeah, I've still had moments where I've parked in the disabled space, got out, and felt like I need to justify why I'm parking there, and felt like someone looking at me wants me to justify why I'm parking there, and they're probably not. But it's that other weird thing is, like, there's a phrase that you hear that you never want someone to say to you, which is, "You don't look disabled enough to me," which is just not how a hidden disability works. I think, you know, we talked a lot about what it's actually like to live with it, and hopefully this is useful for people to understand that, you know, if you're living with it, you're not alone. There's, I think, 20% of UK students are living with a long-term health condition, and so I think we can then turn the conversation now more towards that. So we both work in academia. There's a lot of deadlines. How do you approach managing them? And, you know, when you've got a lot of deadlines to meet, how do you plan, especially when your energy levels might vary? How do you manage situations like that?
I think honestly would be my answer. I think I recognize almost a form of privilege in that I have lived with my condition a long time, and I worked before I came to do the PhD in various jobs. So I've had experience of telling people about the ME and discussing my needs with managers, and also working out what those needs are. So I'm able to articulate, I cannot start work at 9 and end at 5 and have a half-hour lunch break. That isn't going to work for me. I can't go into an office and back every day. I can't manage that journey. I'm able to articulate that, and I do think that is a privilege, because I think particularly if you're developing, or you have developed a condition while you're studying and you're trying to manage those deadlines, you're less able to sort of know, this is what works for me. This is what's going to exacerbate my symptoms. This is what's going to be a barrier. But for me, I found being honest and open really helps. I think if nothing else, this PhD is going to reflect my authentic self and me as a researcher, and ME is part of me, and it's part of the way that I work. So I've been honest with my supervisor when I have been struggling, to sort of renegotiate deadlines, or if I've said I'm going to send her something by X date, saying it's not going to be then, and have that discussion. And I think taking advice, I've needed interruptions during my PhD journey, and I think that's quite a weird thing in the PhD world, because I think when you're working, you have sick leave, or you have adjusted hours, or other kinds of adjustments like that. But when you're a PhD student, this word interruption, I felt like I'd failed somehow to go on interruption, that I should be well enough to do this. So I think I had to sort of work through the emotions associated with that. But I've taken interruption when I've needed it. I've taken extra time off when I've needed it. I've agreed rest with my supervisor, and she understands how important that is for me to be able to work effectively. And I just think having the right supervisor is essential. Not particularly helpful advice if your supervisor and yourself are perhaps not the best fit. But my supervisor's support has been absolutely invaluable. And without her support and understanding, I don't think I'd be at the point where I am now. Definitely not.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think that's the similar experience I've had. But what I would say is, if you are in this situation, if you've not got a supportive supervisor, there are disability services at the university that you can engage with as well. I'd like to stay with you, Rachel, because I think these questions probably more closely align with your experience. And it's all around what sort of tools or techniques you can use to help you in these situations, and if you've adapted how you engage with reading, writing, or all sorts of work associated with your PhD.
I think it's difficult because I've tried different things. Like, for example, there's software that can read papers to you and read out what you've written and things, which I kind of tried. But sometimes it can take more effort to work out what you're doing with the software than it can to actually just get on and read it. So I think for me, I'm at the point now of preparing my thesis for submission, and I have found this period of the PhD absolutely brutal. So I'm just going to be honest about that. It's taken a huge toll on my health, I think, just for various different reasons and factors going on to coincide with this time. But I've used the Pomodoro technique quite effectively. So I have a set amount of Pomodoros. If you've not heard of that, it's you work for 25 minutes or however long, and then you have a rest break. So I have a target for how many Pomodoros I'm going to do a day. And I try and stick to that rather than have a target of this is how much I'm going to read or this is how much I'm going to write. And if I'm not well on a particular day, then I can carry those over. And if I'm more well on a particular day, I can do a bit extra to bank them. So that's kind of how I manage to work it out. But something, Sam, that I struggled with when I started the PhD, because I had mainly worked from home beforehand, I had a very disciplined mindset with working from home. You know, I'm not being paid to go to the toilet or make a cup of tea or, you know, any of this stuff. You know, I'm here to work. But the PhD just doesn't work like that. And it took me a long time, with a lot of supervisor encouragement, I have to say, to get rid of that mindset and understand that the PhD requires you to think. And thinking is not something you can quantify in a 9 to 5. Being a full-time PhD student does not mean being sat at your desk between 9 and 5. And often it can't if you're living with a chronic health condition. It has to look different for you. That thinking is part of it. But when you're used to sort of a work setting, you're not being paid to sit and think about all these philosophical, you know, epistemological things. It's just not something you can compare. So I think being able to appreciate that the PhD is different, that it's takes for me a much bigger toll than working does in terms of fatigue and things like that, and just adjusting your mindset and the way you work accordingly. But in terms of specific software and things, I think it was more just the approach to the work and the way I understood what showing up for my PhD looked like for me each day. And that wasn't a 9 to 5.
It's interesting. There's 2 points you've made there that resonated. The first is that not a 9 to 5. So my first postdoc is in Manchester, and I lived in Liverpool. So it was about an hour drive to get there. And if ever I had a bad result in the lab, I knew if I just went back to the office and sat down and tried to figure it out, I wouldn't get anywhere. The best thing I could do was get in my car, drive home. And in that drive home, I would figure it out by the time I get home what to do next.
Wow.
And I think that is an important thing to remember. You've got to adjust to the way that helps you get the best out of the experience. But the other thing that really strikes me is you could sort of lazily put us both in the same category, 2 people with a chronic health condition. But our experiences are completely different. Yours is so much more a day-to-day, you know, you're not sure what's going to happen with each day, how bad it's going to be. Whereas mine is periods of fine followed by short bursts of incredible sort of incredibly, what's the word? Not severe, but like, you know, it's very graphic illness that really knocks you for 6, and then you get well again. And so there's not even a go-to, this is the best way to do a PhD with a chronic health condition. It really depends on what the condition is and on how best to manage it. And I think that sort of brings us nicely into the next area of the discussion, which is one of the most important things, I think, regardless of what the condition you have is understanding the boundaries and the self-care. So I think we can both tackle this one because we have very different conditions. So how do you personally recognize when you need to rest? And you sort of already answered this already, but how do you give yourself permission to take that rest?
With difficulty, I think is the honest answer. I suppose this kind of links to self-care a little bit and is a bit of a long-winded way of answering this question, but hopefully I'll get there. I think we've all sort of heard of imposter syndrome and things where you don't feel like you deserve your place in doing your PhD. And I think having a chronic condition, I don't think it's as straightforward as just slapping the label imposter syndrome on it, because I think we have a society that doesn't necessarily value disabled people and doesn't necessarily understand and respect what it takes to live and be successful with a chronic condition. And I think we carry that into academia. So there's this sense of less than before you've even started, because of your identity as someone who's living in a body or a mind that just doesn't work as expected or as other people think it does when your condition's invisible. And I think for me, it's just been gradually over the years of my PhD appreciating that there's aspects of my condition. For example, I mean, I think I was pretty creative before I developed ME anyway, but when you're living with a condition, you've got to be creative a lot of the time, I think, in how you solve things and how you approach things. And just how you think about everything, and have to plan everything. Planning is such a massive thing, I think, for a lot of chronic conditions, and you're planning if you're well and if you're not well, and what you're going to do if this happens and what you'll do if that doesn't happen, and you're carrying that all the time. And I think it's been a gradual kind of letting go and being like, no, actually this way of thinking is valid, it is academic. My character and my experience of illness makes me a strong PhD candidate. It's part of that self. It's part of what I bring to the table as an academic. It's not something to be put to the side or to, deny about myself. It's part of the package. So I think in terms of self-care, it's true that we often would tell a friend something very different to what we tell ourselves. And because I have supervisors who are very wise, but also very, very kind, I've been able to internalize their kindness to myself, and to not only in the way that I work, but in the way that I see myself and the way that I understand who I am in the PhD picture. Does that address the question, Sam? Sorry, it's a bit long.
It does. Yeah, I think it addressed it really well. I think that's the key thing is understanding that it's just part of who you are now, and there's things that you have to do that other people don't have to do. I think, again, it's that contrast between the two types. So for me, it's how do I know I need rest? Well, it becomes very obvious when I do. It's suddenly, if it suddenly comes on, it's like, okay, message my supervisor, I can't come in today. This is happening. I need to be near the bathroom, that kind of thing. With inflammatory bowel disease, though, because it's inflammatory, because a lot of the mechanisms are sort of perhaps better understood, because a lot of the biology has been defined, and so the therapies have been developed and all that kind of stuff. I now understand a lot of the other risk factors, so stress and bad diet and things like that. So I try and incorporate sort of stress relievers in my day. So I've now got a routine that involves, before I have my breakfast, I've been to the gym and I've been to the sauna. And I feel like that 15 minutes to just sit in the sauna and just fully rest makes a big difference. But I think what I've found is when it is bad, I had a tendency to try and rush back rather than take the time my body needs to heal. And actually, when I was in hospital, when I was discharged, I was still quite unwell, but the sort of intravenous steroids that they give me was starting to turn things around. And the best thing I ever did was ask the gastroenterologist, like, what happens next? And he basically said, you're turning a massive oil tank around in the middle of the North Sea. Like, it's not just going to suddenly spin around and be well again. You're going to need to take a lot of time and slowly recover. And I think probably took the best part of another month to get back on my feet. And I think academia has a tendency to really encourage you to sort of push through when perhaps you should take rest. You hear phrases like publish or perish, or you must be writing grants. It's like, well, so your own personal health is far more important, and I think it is really important to understand when it is time to rest. And have you ever faced any barriers in requesting adjustments, or have you found that largely you've had a lot of support around you with that?
I think I have been extremely blessed by my supervisory team, because I think they've done everything possible to ensure that I can work as effectively as possible. I mean, I will say, because as I say, honesty is something that I value. I did apply for disabled students allowance, and I did find that very onerous and actually quite distressing at times. That may be particular to my situation, because I relocated when I started the PhD from England to Scotland, which was a whole other bunch of fun, because I think relocating for your PhD is difficult enough. But one of the issues I have is using stairs. So when you're relocating to somewhere like Glasgow, which is mainly flats, most flats are not on the ground floor and they're not accessible by lift. So it makes moving and things like that even harder, because you have to consider things like that for your housing needs as well as your academic needs. But with relocating, disabled students allowance is different in Scotland than it is to England. So it took a very long time, because England was saying I should apply to Scotland and Scotland was saying I need to apply in England, and it was a bit of a mess. And to be honest, it continued to be difficult for most of my PhD. Hopefully most students would not have that experience and it will be much more straightforward, but I would say to seek advice from most universities. Will have, you know, a department to specifically assist disabled students, and they should be able to help. But also I think it's those non-specific things on offer from the university. So, for example, the library staff have been amazing. You know, they will post out books to me, and the librarian puts a fantastic, lovely little note in the book, and it just really makes my heart smile. And counselling service from the university as well, I've also found really helpful, because while we both have physical health conditions, I think when you're trying to manage that and a PhD, obviously your mental health is connected. So I think it's about utilising all the resources that are available to you, not just those specific, you know, with a disability label. You know, my colleagues, for example, my student colleagues have been invaluable in sort of just sharing the experience and, you know, being able to be honest with them about where I'm at and things like that. So I think having that community around you is really important.
Yeah, I think I definitely second that. When I was in hospital, I had all these thoughts like, is this my life now? Is this what it's going to be like? You know, if ulcerative colitis gets really bad, the solution is they do a surgery and they remove your colon, and then you have to have a stoma for the rest of your life. There's other things they can do around that, but you know, I was thinking, is that going to happen? Is this what my life's going to look like? And actually, when when I got out of hospital and I was starting to heal physically, when it was time to go back to work, that was actually quite comforting, because then I had other voices around me. And because there is a huge mental battle with something like that, you don't know what each day is going to be like. And that mental strength, I think, only builds up over time and through speaking to people. And I found that the people I've worked with have been really supportive on that. And again, you know, the same question about you know, support. I've also been very fortunate that the universities that I've worked with have been really supportive as well. And I think that speaks to a larger shift in the way not just universities but employers understand hidden disabilities a lot more. And I would hope to see that across not just academia but industry as well. Now, on that, you know, we've been very complimentary and we've talked very positively about our experiences, but do you think that there's any particular support system or any particular person that's helped you the most in navigating it?
I would have to say my supervisor, simply because your supervisor, in my experience anyway, is just so crucial to your PhD journey. You know, they influence what your journey is like and how it's managed. And I think I've just had an extremely brilliant supervisor. You know, I think I'll be honest, because I live with this really profound fatigue. I cry a lot. You know, I'm also emotional, so that doesn't help. But I think when you're tired, it's so much harder, you know, to kind of contain, you know, my emotions. Like, I just have to let it out, because I haven't got the energy to look like I'm happy or whatever. So I think I've just sat there and just cried, you know, with my supervisor, and just been, you know, and just been honest about where I'm at. And I think, again, that can kind of feed into this, oh, you're sat there crying, why are you doing a PhD, kind of negative voice. But my supervisor can kind of feed in and counteract that with those more positive messages that, as you were saying, were just so important. So I think if it was one person, Sam, it would have to be my supervisor.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think that support network is the most critical thing. I think for me, I think it was more, the lowest point for me was that time in hospital. It was in the middle of the pandemic. I was in there for 7 days. I couldn't have any visitors. Fortunately, I was given my own room, and the room had a view over the Mersey, the Mersey estuary. So in the morning I could watch the sunrise, and actually the nurses would laugh because they come in and my bed would be raised about 6 feet off the ground, so I could see through the windows. But I think the most important person for me there was not actually anyone academic. It was speaking to my partner all the time, and then beyond that, my friends as well, because I found sort of joking about it and making light of the situation. I don't know if it was the best way to handle it, but that made me feel a lot better. Just like, you know what, it's going to be okay. It is going to be okay. I think from a work standpoint, I would echo what you said. Every supervisor that I've worked with has been incredibly supportive. I mean, it helps that the person I work with now in Birmingham I've known for 12 years. And the very first time I met them, looking back, was probably the first time I actually had any indication that this illness was actually on its way towards me. It was a very, let's just say, disruptive day, and one that we still sort of look back and sort of lightheartedly joke about. But I think having that honest relationship, and we can see in the chat, a guy called John is saying that he's also had fantastic support from Sterling Student Services. It's good to hear that other universities are giving that same level of support. And I think we're talking a lot about our own experience, but there will be people out there who are perhaps just starting a postdoc or starting a PhD or have just been diagnosed in the middle. Is there any particular advice you'd give to someone who's maybe, let's start with just starting a PhD and then move on to they get diagnosed midway through doing something like that?
I'm going to be a little bit controversial here, and this is not to be taken out of context, but my advice would be don't go for a walk. And the reason I say that is because, particularly I think during my first and second years of the PhD, I heard this so much: go for a walk. It's good for your mental health. Go and get some fresh air, listen to birdsong, go for a walk. And I think particularly when you're starting a PhD, you want to take all the advice possible. You want to be the best PhD student you can be. You want to fulfill your potential. You don't want to let your illness hold you back from that. You're taking all this advice. And then I think as you sort of mature through the process, you can then be a bit more discerning about the advice that's right for you. And you can pick and choose a bit more kind of where you listen and where you apply things. But right at the beginning, you want to take everything in. And I think when we're telling people to go for a walk, we are assuming that it's possible for them to walk. We're assuming that walking doesn't exacerbate fatigue, doesn't cause pain, that someone can get in and out of their home without discomfort. I live with a motorway opposite me. So when I go for a walk, literally the options available to me is the distance I can walk is basically along the motorway and maybe down a side street through an industrial estate. It is not the birdsong mindful kind of walk that I think that advice kind of has in mind. So I think when I say don't go for a walk, of course go for a walk if that's what's helpful to you. It's helpful for a lot of people, and I'm not saying it isn't. But I think what I am saying is just that not all advice is going to apply to you, and not all advice is going to be helpful to you. And I think it's about being able to say, yeah, it's great that, everybody else is going out for a drink, or everyone else is going for a walk, or everyone's doing a mindful session during the lunch break, but I need to go and lie down. I need to go and, make myself a really nice dinner. I need to do something different. And it's about giving yourself permission to do something different. And that doesn't make you less of a student. It doesn't make you less successful. It just means that the advice that applies to everyone else and might benefit them, for you and your illness and your condition, just might not be right for you.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think to add on to that, what helped me was trying to understand as much as I could about the illness as possible, so that then I could work out what my equivalent of going for a walk was. So for you, it sounds like it's making yourself a nice dinner or having a lie down, doing some genuine self-care.
Having a
And
pizza, Sam, really. I
yeah,
think it's
yeah,
good
yeah,
stuff.
exactly. That's a great choice. For me, I quickly learned what it wasn't. And what it wasn't is looking on subreddits of ulcerative colitis and IBD. All you're going to hear there are horror stories about the illness. So one piece of advice I would give is avoid, where possible, looking at social media channels, because you're just going to see the worst case scenarios and it's not going to help you. You're far better off actually speaking to specialists and then speaking to people who can be impartial as well. And then, yeah, it's just understanding as much as you can about the situation. I think you need to speak to your supervisor in the university so you can have an open and transparent discussion. You don't have to tell them the details. They don't need to know the details, but they just need to know how they can help you and support you. And how much you want to tell them is almost up to you, because there's obviously legal implications. They can't ask you what it is, but they can ask you how they can help. And I think getting as much support from the university as you can, because they are there to help you as well. And it sounds like the general consensus across universities is they are there to help you in that scenario. And just understand and have realistic expectations of how that's going to affect things, because you don't want to be in a situation where you're feeling guilty or feeling like you're being held back. As long as for me, for example, I know that if things get bad, I'm going to need to take at least a month off. That's fine. That's that. So if it gets bad, that's the conversation I have, and that's okay. That's just a situation. And I think you need to. And I think everyone who has a chronic illness goes through a period of acceptance. And I think once you get through that, it makes those conversations a lot easier, because you need to look, this is the situation, I accept it, this is how it affects things. I don't know, would you agree on that?
Yeah, I would. I think it's difficult with this acceptance, because I think for me, I've come to a place of acceptance because this is my daily reality. I've lived with ME for more than I have without during my life. So it's all I've known, my adult life. And I've just had to negotiate life with it. And it's part of me now. But with that acceptance, I've still got that hope that one day I won't be living with ME, that one day I might just wake up and I won't be tired anymore, that I'll be able to sort of run and go upstairs and all these sort of things, and it just won't have the discomfort and the effect that it does. I still live with that hope. And I think it's quite difficult when your condition is perhaps one where there are treatments that might be effective for you, or it's possible to fully recover and to be well from it. You don't know your prognosis. We assume that as well. People have a diagnosis. Often, ME took years to diagnose, and other people experiencing symptoms may not be at that point of diagnosis. So they're still wrestling with am I really ill or am I just imagining it kind of scenario. So I think the diagnosis is an important part of acceptance. But I think if you're not able to access that, it's just accepting, this is what I have today. This is what I have to work with. How can I make the best of what I've got within my capacity today? I have a tendency, I've been told, to get into my own head too much, and I sort of go into the future, what if this and what if that, and I can kind of stress myself out a little bit. But I think that's because there's so much that I just don't know. So I think it can be helpful to just be like, today, what is my capacity like, regardless of your diagnosis, regardless of your prognosis? What is the best day to day going to look like for you? And then just try and go for that and adapt it as you need to as the day goes on.
Yeah, and I think from a peer perspective, if you're speaking to somebody, and they're talking about these issues, the best thing you can is believe everything they say. I think, it's if they're talking about health concerns and how they feel today, just believe them and be empathetic. That's their reality, and you can't deny their reality. That's what they're living with, and I think it sounds like that's one thing that you've had very, very kindly provided with the people around you. Now we're going to finish with a question, and while we answer that, I'd invite anybody watching or listening to type any questions they have into the chat, and we can answer those as well before we finish. But I think this is the big question. What is there anything you wish that people understood better about not just living with chronic illness, but also living with your chronic illness as well and studying with that?
I think I am very fortunate because I have a very good group of friends, both at university and you know, outside of university, that know me and trust me and also know my condition often better than I do. They'll tell me, you know, you need to kind of, you know, can tell you're really tired. And I think I can almost take for granted that everybody has that, because I'm really blessed to have that in my life. And when you don't, you know, when you've got people looking at you because you're coming out of an accessible toilet or an accessible parking space and you don't look like you need it, you're constantly kind of evaluating what other people are thinking, and then, you know, oh, are you well enough, you know, should I not use another space? And I just think for me it just helps to focus on the people close to me in my life and what they think matters, because they're the people that know me. And I think I'm kind of quite good now. I wasn't back in the day, but now I'm quite good at being like, well, if other people don't get it, that really is their problem. I cannot convince them. I cannot give them my body for a day that they can try living it. If other people think ME is just about being a bit tired because you didn't sleep so well, there's nothing I'm going to say that's going to help them to understand that any better. So I'm just going to focus on cracking on with my life, being there and being with the people that are important to me, and trying to block out anything that's negative or other people that don't understand, because it's just not in my power to give them that understanding.
I think I would follow up with that with the one thing I'd want people to understand is this is not something that we're using as an excuse. We don't want this. We want to be out doing. So what, you know, when I'm ill, I want to be out doing the things I would normally do. I'm not sitting at home because I want to stay in bed. I'm staying in bed because that's the only way I can function at that moment. I want to be out doing the stuff that everyone else is doing. And I think from a specific perspective around mine, I'd like there to be a better understanding between the differences between IBS and IBD, and why IBD is more serious and requires more serious adjustments. But I think the main thing for me is when our chronic illness is flaring up, it's the last thing we want. We're not using it as an excuse to not doing anything. We want to be out doing those things. There's nothing we can do at that moment until it gets better. So we've not had any specific questions from the chat. So I think what we'll end with is something that's perhaps a nice uplifting way to end. So we've talked a lot about the impacts of our particular chronic health illnesses, you know, the adjustments we've had, the support we've had around us. How hopeful do you feel about the future? You've just submitted, you're getting ready to submit your thesis, the virus on the way. Are you feeling excited about what comes next?
No, I'm just feeling stressed and overwhelmed. But I will feel excited. I think part of the reason that I am struggling, and again, I'm going to be open about that because I wouldn't want anybody who's at a similar phase of their PhD to feel like, you know, that they're on their own in feeling that. This has been a real struggle. And I think part of that is because I am just exhausted, and not just ME exhausted, but just, you know, everything exhausted as I come to the end of the PhD. And it's very hard to enjoy something or feel excitement when that exhaustion is just like overwhelming everything. So I feel hopeful that I will feel hopeful when I've sort of had a chance to properly kind of switch off and get that rest.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing. Take the rest, enjoy it, and then look forward to the next steps.
I mean, I have to feel hopeful, Sam, because there would have been a time in not so long ago a history when somebody like me living with ME would not be doing a PhD. It just would not be possible. It just, you know, what? But here I am, I'm doing my PhD, I'm finishing my PhD, and I'm a better researcher because of the insight and the creativity and the way of thinking that living with ME has necessitated. It's part of me being a really good researcher. So I would just encourage people that are living with a chronic illness that it is a struggle. It's not a part of you that you'd necessarily choose or want, but it is a part of you. It's part of your life. It's part of the way that you work. And you can use that as an asset and as a strength that other people around you just don't have.
Yeah, that's important. And I think hopefully that's a message of inspiration for everyone else. It's the landscape is getting better, understanding is getting better, and it's only as that support structure gets better, that it should be, I don't know if easier is the right word, but you'll feel more reassured and more supported by the network around you. So we hope that everyone watching this today has found this discussion helpful. We've tried to be as open as possible. Hopefully there's people out there that this will give some reassurance to, and hopefully if you maybe not have a chronic illness yourself, but know people who do, how better to support them. So I think all that's left is to say thank you for joining us today, Rachel. It's been a really insightful conversation. And thank you all for listening, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you, Sam. Bye, everyone.
Bye.